Over 50% of the children in public schools today in America are children of color. Over 50% of the children are children in poverty. If we don't find leadership that understands and in many cases reflects those demographic changes, we're not going to be able to do the work. So it's not to say that others can't do this work, but it does make a difference when you feel a deep personal connection to some of the hardships that our children experience each and every day, some of the hardships that Dan spoke to. I was also thinking when I heard Dan speak about how I met Dan. Dan, in 2001, you might remember you were a part of a cohort that we were working with the superintendents at Harvard. And sad thing about that cohort is several of the superintendents are no longer alive that were in that cohort. And about a year into it, we were talking about how to support these superintendents, and we realized, you know what, we can't focus the work on the superintendents. We have to focus instead on the districts, because the superintendents don't survive. And if we invest too heavily in an individual and they're gone, then all our work in that district is wasted. And I think, sadly, that's a reflection of the landscape out there. You know, if you weren't listening when Dan said, this institute is about how to survive and not be killed, that was his words. And he's the leader of ASA, right? I mean, the sad thing is that all you have to do is look at what's happening across the country to education leaders. And it's not a pretty picture. And you can point to big cities, small cities. I mean, it's a little different out there in suburbia, particularly if you're in a stable, affluent area, or in rural America where there aren't much choices, but they pretty much have to keep you, right? But in the big cities or in the urban environments, it's a different ballgame. And then as Dan said, I would say there are two big issues. One is politics, for sure. Right? And politics, as we know, undoes and undermines a number of good, effective leaders. But the other is poverty. Right? And why poverty? Because increasingly across the country today, we have a dual system of education in our urban areas. A private system for the affluent and a public system for the poor. And that will never work. It will never work because there's simply not enough in most cities, commitment to ensuring that the children of the poor receive the education they need and deserve. Unfortunately, and we see this right now, even as they are commemorating 10 years of since Katrina in New Orleans. New Orleans, you know, within a year after Katrina, the Super Bowl, the Saints were back in the Super Bowl, if you can remember. Right? The Superdome was up. Saints were rocking and rolling. It took years to get schools back in New Orleans, and there are still very few, a number of neighborhoods in Lower Ninth Ward and elsewhere that really don't have schools. And I would say that's a reflection of the fact that across this country, we invest far more in professional sports than we do in children. Right? And that's, you can name the city, and I can tell you, look at Miami, how they invested in those Marlins that ripped them off, right? Ripped off the whole city. Meanwhile, the children of Miami, some of the poorest kids in the country, continue to be in overcrowded classroom, under-resourced schools. Now, I can go on, but when Dan talks about equity, we have to keep in mind, equity is not anywhere reflected in education policy in America today, right? At either the federal or the state level. 2011, an equity report came and was issued by the U.S. Department of Education. I asked Secretary Duncan right after its release, will that report somehow be reflected in the new direction of education policy? And he passed on the question. And it hasn't been. The most they've done is since their new head of the Civil Rights Department, Kathy Lehman, was appointed, as at least acknowledged the inequities and the vast disparities that characterize American education in America today. But in terms of enacting policies that pursue equity, Not even on the horizon, not even on the agenda. And that is both a Democratic and a Republican issue. So I would say we got a lot of work to do. The politics at the local level really come down to the fact that there are a lot of school boards that are, I think, out of control, right? Where the politics of running for office take precedent over the needs of the children in the community. Where in too many cases, I mean, I'm just talking to a superintendent in a mid-Atlantic state, I won't name it, who is just under constant attack in the local press for nothing. They just got him there. And so, I mean, I just want to acknowledge the landscape you're going into. This is not work for the weak or the faint-hearted. And so I want to applaud you because the need is great. At the same time, I want to acknowledge how hard it is to do a good job at this time because the obstacles are also very significant. There are bright spots out there. I just came from Grand Rapids, Michigan, where I saw a superintendent who is in place, who is leading fearlessly. She's worked in the district for 41 years. She said she started out as an intern and been there through. She said she went into the job telling them, I don't need this. I can retire now. And she's leading like someone who doesn't need a job, fearlessly. And it was so good to see a person, woman of color, in that kind of leadership role. I saw the same thing in Asheville, North Carolina. And think about this. Elizabeth, New Jersey, the only urban district not controlled by the state of New Jersey, is thriving. Thriving under a woman of color. Thriving in a district that serves a large numbers of English language learners. So there are some bright spots out there. They don't get nearly enough attention. But they are, I think, a good reason to reflect and understand what is possible even amidst the constraints. So I want to use my time to offer advice. And I have 10 points of advice for those of you who are brave enough to enter this field. And the advice comes from watching good people in positions of leadership, some of whom are in the audience today, and how they led and how they were able to manage the minefields that are out there, but also comes from seeing good people who fell. Right, and the mistakes they made, and the ways in which they might have been blindsided. So the first mistake is, and I want to reinforce Dan's point, the job is political. Right, 50% of the job is political. So what does that mean? You have to understand where the power is in your community. Right? And the power might not just be on the board. It might be in the mayor's office. It might be in the business community. You have to know where the power is, and now how to relate to that power and work with it. Otherwise, don't take the job. Don't take the job, otherwise you'll be set up for failure. And so understanding how to read the political landscape, who your allies need to be, how to develop a base is so essential to surviving so that you can in fact make a difference. Because if you're not in the job, you're not going to make a difference. Right? I was so happy to see my old friend Sybil here from Sybil Knight from Harrisburg, because she told me she's been there 5 years now. I'm sure she's got stories to tell, how to survive in the state's capital. And so first thing is, keep in mind it is political. And that means that your political acumen, knowing who your allies, who knows the history of the community you're in, and who can warn you of the threats before they come to bite you. Secondly, communication matters. You've got to figure out how to control the narrative about you and about the district. Otherwise, you will be consumed by it. Right? The media narrative across the country is so negative towards public education. Right? All we hear are the attacks on teachers, the scandals in public education today. The failure, the mediocrity. We don't hear the stories about the resilience in our kids. We don't hear the stories about schools beating the odds. We don't hear about the hard work of educators who are doing so much and getting paid so little. You need to get out in front so that the media message is one that you can try to control. I realize it's not easy, but it's part of the work too. If you do a good job but no one knows, it's like it never happened, right? And so figuring out how to engage the media and not being afraid to do press conferences and to do interviews so that your message is being out there is, I think, of critical importance. Otherwise, you're going to find that the media will become a big liability for you. Third, avoid fights unless you can't. Right? You have limited energy. If you consume yourself with fighting every battle, you're not going to have time to solve problems. You know, you got to figure out what pick and choose, and sometimes compromise is the best strategy. If you spend your time fighting with your union, fighting with your board, fighting with your staff, fighting with your parents, you're going to have no time to solve problems. And so I would really encourage you to become a master at compromise, to become a master at figuring out how to win-win, how to work things through, how to resolve or at least agree to disagree. Because if you spend your time fighting, it's going to take a toll. And I would say there are a lot of people I know who were doing the good work, but they got consumed by the battles, right, that took a toll on them eventually. And learning how to deal with your opponents and how to neutralize them. Remember the old advice from Machiavelli, you know, it is better to be loved than hated, right? But it's even more important to be respected, right? And so it is figure out how do you make sure that your community respects you and that you're not being consumed by the negative attacks that will come from prolonged battles and fights with your opponents. And there will be opponents out there. Fourth, I can't say enough, build your team. Build your team. Surround yourself with competent people who know how to get things done. Do not be so arrogant that you feel you have to be the smartest person in the room. All right? Find smart people to work with you who can bring you advice that you need to hear. Good, reliable, sound advice, particularly related to the finances in the district. How many superintendents have we seen undermined by poor financial management because they didn't understand the budget and how to read it? I know several superintendents who never got a competent chief of staff who could follow through on things, and therefore they appeared to never be able to get things done. You know, get people around you who are good at what they do, hold them accountable, build a team. Do not make the mistake that I've seen made before, that everything done before you was a problem, that only good things happened when you came, right? And therefore you have no one around you with any institutional memory, no one around you who knows the community. Huge mistake I've seen made over and over again. The whole team is from another town. Meanwhile, no one knows the city they're in. They don't even know how to get around without GPS, right? Big mistake. So strike that balance between a highly competent team that you know and trust, but also people who know that community, understand that district, can tell you where the problems lie, and help you navigate unknown waters. 5, you got to have a proactive agenda. I see too many leaders who are constantly in reaction mode. They're constantly reacting what comes at them. Their heads are spinning. They don't have an agenda. Now, the other mistake I would say is don't spend your first few years developing an agenda. You don't have the time. Right? I know a very smart, capable superintendent who spent his first 3 years developing a strategic plan. I said, you act like you have forever, man. Next thing I know, he was out because he didn't have forever, even though the plan made sense, even though they didn't need a plan. You have to generate the sense that you know what you're doing, that you actually know how to get things moving. So yes, there might be a need for an academic audit, for example, to make sure that the resources follow real priorities, because in many districts they don't. Right? In many districts, the money for the classroom is the lowest priority, and resources are in central office and elsewhere. So it might take time to redirect those resources, right? And that might be part of what you've got to do. It may take time to get effective data systems in place so you can actually know what's happening in your system. But even as you put in an infrastructure so you can manage a complex system, you've got to demonstrate you can get things moving. You can make things happen, because people are not patient these days. As soon as you get the position, they're going to want to know, what did you accomplish? What has changed? Have the test scores gone up? Have graduation rates changed? And so you need to demonstrate, I have a plan with short, medium, long-term goals. Here's my plan. And these goals are measurable. These goals are goals that I can share with anyone and explain to anyone. I would say it's better to be a strong offense. This is going to be a very important part of defending yourself. And if you don't have one, you're going to find that you're going to be in constant defensive mode, where you are constantly reacting to the criticisms of others. Sixth, you need an ambitious reform agenda. Okay? Dan has talked about equity. I want to encourage you, those of you who haven't seen it already, to read an article in the New Yorker this week about Jamaica High School in Queens. Right? Jamaica High School by Jelani Cobb. Jamaica High School was one of the largest high schools in the country, and with a distinguished alumni. Today, it is a shadow of itself. It's about to be closed. And the de Blasio administration has no plans for how to restore it to even what it once was. Our idea of reform is to tinker with failure. Right? To tinker on the edges with failure, and it's not working. And that's the reason why the charter schools are eating these cities alive. Because they say, since you don't know how to manage the system, we will keep taking your kids away and open up alternatives. That's the agenda. And it's happening. And they're proliferating. And what happens as they open up new schools? It means you're going to be increasingly left with the kids they don't want to serve. The most disadvantaged children. And why would you expect otherwise? Working with another district in the Midwest, they shut down schools in neighborhoods. What happens? Within 3 months, a charter school opens up in the same neighborhood, and the kids that were once served there are back in school, not in a district school, now in a charter school, because the district has no vision for how to serve its own community. It's not offering anything. It's not offering quality. It's not offering anything that would attract middle-class parents. So you need to have an agenda for how you're going to win the confidence of your community back in. And that agenda can't be based on low standards and low expectations. It's got to be based on what you know as a parent you would want for your children. And so we've got to have, I believe, a vision that will excite funders, excite our community. We've got to renew schools. It's not good enough to patch up bad schools and hope that they're better than they were before. That is such a minimal, broken down agenda. That's race for the top, and you see where it's taken us, right? We've got to do better than that. 7, avoid gimmicks and boondoggles. Should I mention the $1 billion on iPads without? Don't do it, okay? There are no gimmicks, and there will be vendors coming to sell you right away, won't they, Dan? They'll be showing up at your door, buy this elixir, and it will fix your kids, right? Be careful. Be careful about what you invest in. Be careful about how you use your resources. Be careful about anything that even looks like impropriety, because they're watching you. Right? I know superintendents got in trouble because their spouse was hired as a teacher, right? As if that was a patronage job. Right? So just be careful and be cautious about what you invest public resources in. You're held to a very high standard, and again, I've seen too many people taken down for what I would regard as minor infractions. 8, inspire your staff. Don't beat them down. Don't berate. Don't just scrutinize. Create an environment where people want to work for you. Create an environment where people are attracted. They say, I want to come to your district because this is a visionary leader who is making things happen. I go to too many places where the message coming from the central office is nothing but blame. When they visit the schools, no one's happy to see them. Why? Because all they offer is scrutiny, right? and more criticism. Be a collaborator, be a problem solver, be a source of hope and a source of inspiration. This work is hard, and you will have to make tough decisions. But you've got to find ways to build people up too, because you're not going to be able to fire your way into a better district. You're going to have to figure out ways to get people to be better at what they do, and they'll be better. And I will tell you this, I have never seen a high-performing school where people don't work hard. Never seen one. And I've never seen a contract written that makes people work hard. Right? So the question is, how do you create an environment where people want to work hard, are inspired around the vision so they're willing to give more, willing to do more? People need inspiration right now. Hope is powerful. We rely too heavily on fear as a motivator in this country. Fear of your job, fear of your schools being closed down. Don't be another fearmonger. Too much of that as it is. 9, stay focused on teaching and learning. Don't lose sight. That's what this is about. That's what matters. And I realize I already said you got to keep in mind the politics, got to keep in mind all these other things. But guess what? If you don't keep in mind teaching and learning, then the whole thing's lost. Talk about children. Talk about what good teaching looks like. Elevate the examples. Talk about the schools you visit and the inspiring lessons you've observed. Talk about how to replicate that and why that's an example worth emulating. We need more focus on high quality instruction and what that looks like for a great number of children. We don't make good teaching transparent nearly enough. I haven't been to a school yet, even some of the most dysfunctional schools I go to, I will find highly effective teachers. And what always strikes me is, why is no one learning from this person? Why is this person working in isolation? I was asked to do a workshop for over 500 failing schools in New York a couple years ago. And I started giving them examples of high-performing schools in their districts that they could learn from. And they came up to me afterwards, asking me for how to visit these schools. I said, I don't work for the State Department of Education. Ask them. But that's not what the state thinks their job is. They think their job is merely to issue more threats. You need to know, where is their success? Where are the beacons of hope? Shine the light on those examples so others can learn from it and be inspired by good work that's going on. And when you see good work going on, acknowledge it and reinforce it so that people can appreciate that you see their hard work. It doesn't happen nearly enough. And I think that's one of the reasons why so many people who are committed educators are leaving the profession. Lastly, take care of yourself. Take care of yourself. Take care of yourself physically, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, because we all know too many good people who've taken on this work who are not here and left prematurely. Prematurely because the work took a toll, because they sacrificed their bodies, they sacrificed their families, they sacrificed, and they got very little back. So you've got to take care of yourself too. You got to make sure you take time to exercise, that you're eating right, that you get enough rest, that you pray, you meditate, you do what it takes so that you can keep coming back and giving more. If you don't take care of yourself, you won't be around. It's that simple. And so I would encourage you to think of a plan that will allow you to take on this very challenging work and do it in a sustainable way. Dan started out by saying how important and critical a time it is. It really is. The future of this country is going to be determined by what happens in its schools. All right. And it's discouraging because we know that our political leaders aren't doing the work to support public education. We're not even close. Right? We're not investing in our children. We're not investing in our schools. We confuse blaming educators with a strategy. And the more you watch these debates and you listen to candidates, the more discouraging it becomes. Right? But if you do have the courage to do the work, if you have the courage to lead right now, and I'm glad you do, because we need people with courage and integrity to do it, then I also hope that you can keep in mind the big picture. The pendulum is going to swing again in this country. I think that the standards and accountability movement, as we've known under No Child Behind, has run its course. I think the opt-out movement is not just a blip. There's going to be more and more calls for change. I'm seeing it happening in Virginia. There's a new leadership in the state saying, you know what, we need to do assessment differently. Stop using assessment as a weapon on people, use assessment as a tool. I'm seeing that happen in California, where for the first time we have a state that's implemented an equity finance agenda. I'm seeing change happening not from Washington, but from elsewhere. And as the changes occur and more Americans start to realize that we've got to simply do more than use pressure as a strategy for improvement, they're going to look to leaders who can actually show us how to go about the hard work of educating this next generation of children. I hope that you'll be around to be that next generation and provide real, live examples of what's possible when we create schools where the conditions are right and good teaching and learning can occur, and kids, even kids who come from poor, disadvantaged backgrounds, can beat the odds and use their education to help themselves, help their families, help this country. That's what education's always been about. That's why public education continues to be so important. So thank you for doing this work. Thank you for this opportunity today. I'm happy to be part of it.